I still vividly remember the first day I came into contact with an addictive substance. A seemingly harmless moment, just a try it once to know. But that was the first step that led me on a dark journey, where the shadows gradually swallowed my youth and my future. I was very young then, full of curiosity and a desire to explore the world. During a get-together with friends, someone said, "Just one time, what's the big deal?" I laughed, thinking I was strong enough to control it, that nothing could tie me down. Little did I know that one time was enough to open a door that was not easy to close. Initially, I didn't see anything serious. The substance made me feel euphoric, making me forget all the pressures of school, work, and family. It gave me a sense of being high, confident, and liberated, something I thought I needed. I started seeking it out more often, from short moments of fun to endless long nights. What seemed like a small pleasure gradually became a dependence. I no longer felt okay without it. On days when I didn't have it, I became restless, irritable, and sleepless. My mind was always preoccupied with finding more. Gradually, it was no longer a choice but a burden, an invisible chain that bound me. Of the people who tried it with me at first, some left, and some just dabbled and quit. But I was stuck. I didn't realize I was going downhill. It all started with curiosity, a single try, but that one time became a habit and then an addiction. Looking back, I realized no addiction starts with a deliberate desire to destroy oneself. It always begins with innocence, curiosity, or the desire to fit in with friends. But these seemingly harmless things opened up a dark vortex, and the more I struggled, the deeper I was pulled in. I didn't know that behind that feeling of excitement was a giant trap. It gradually took away my peace, health, relationships, and even my soul. But at the moment it started, I was so blind I didn't notice. At first, I thought I was just trying a little to relieve stress, one time, then two times. And I reassured myself that I was in complete control. But the truth was, before long, that try turned into a habit, and a habit quickly turned into a chain. I didn't realize when I had become trapped in a dark spiral, a deep hole pulling me down faster and faster. Every morning when I woke up, I swore to myself, today will not be like yesterday. Today I will stop. But by afternoon, the temptation would whisper in my ear, and I would fall again. The feeling of losing to myself became familiar. I looked at myself in the mirror and no longer recognized that face. Haggard, tired, and with empty eyes. My job, which was once my passion and pride, began to fall apart. I was often late, didn't meet deadlines, and my mind was always somewhere other than work. My colleagues gradually lost trust in me. My boss gave me many reminders, and in the end, there were only looks of disappointment. My close relationships were not spared either. Friends who once stood by me slowly drifted away because they no longer recognized the friend they once cherished. I always found ways to hide, lie, and make excuses to avoid every plan. My family began to worry. My mother cried silently when she saw her son becoming more and more haggard. My father remained silent, but his eyes were heavy with sadness. The pleasure that the addictive substance brought was just an illusion. It was like a fleeting breeze that, after a moment of excitement, left a desolate field in my heart. The joy disappeared, leaving only emptiness, loneliness, and guilt. I knew I was destroying my life, but I couldn't find a way out. I remember once, on a rainy night, I sat alone in a dark corner, trembling, my mind spinning. I felt like I was being torn between two people, one who longed for freedom and one who was tightly chained by dependence. I cried out in despair, "Why can't I stop? Why am I so weak?" But the only answer was the pitter-patter of the rain outside, cold and indifferent. The more I resisted, the deeper I sank. It was as if I was falling into a bottomless pit, my hands grasping but finding no foothold. And my greatest fear was that one day I would never be able to get out. I would lose everything: my job, my love, my family, my friends, and ultimately, myself. The vortex tightened, and I was helpless, like someone being swept away in a flood. There were times I asked myself, how can a person lose so much in such a short amount of time? The loss was not just a material separation, but a slow, smoldering collapse of the soul. When my family grew distant, my friends turned their backs, and my own health betrayed me. It was all like a fierce storm that swept away every last pillar of support, leaving me lost in a vast emptiness. At first, I stubbornly thought that everything was temporary. My family would be close again, my friends would eventually understand, and my health would recover. But the truth was much more brutal. The family meals that were once full of laughter now became cold, with everyone seemingly only concerned with their own world. I realized the distance was not just at the dinner table, but in our hearts. Every word became heavy, every gesture filled with exhaustion. I started to be afraid to go home, afraid of the reproachful looks, afraid of the feeling of being an outcast in my own home. My friends, the people I once believed would never abandon me, gradually withdrew from my life. First, the messages became less frequent, then the promises never came true. I felt like a burden in their eyes. When I needed a hug, I only received silence. When I needed a word of comfort, I only heard the phone ringing into an empty space. Worse still were the whispers behind my back, the looks of pity mixed with contempt. I went from being a vibrant person in a crowd to someone on the sidelines, watching all the fun happen with a pang of pain in my heart. But perhaps the hardest blow came from my health. My body began to fail as if reflecting the decay within. Every morning was a struggle, my body felt heavy, my mind was exhausted, and I had no energy to continue. Nameless pains tormented me, making every step a torment. I went to the doctor and received cold results. Physical exhaustion, severe stress, need rest. But how could I rest when even sleep had abandoned me? I was lost in a cycle of insomnia, anxiety, exhaustion, so that every day I lived felt like my breath was gradually running out. Some nights I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the person in it anymore. The haggard face, the empty eyes, the fake smile. I had become my own shadow, a distorted, strange version, without warmth, without hope. I remembered the days when I was healthy, full of energy, and believed in my dreams. Now those memories were like an old movie, playing only to remind me that I had lost everything. The successive losses made me begin to question the value of my existence. If my family was no longer a place to return to, if my friends were no longer a place to share with, if my health was no longer the resource to move forward, then what was I living for? I began to fall into a deep pit of questions with no answers. The more I sought, the more I got lost. The more I tried to cling on, the more exhausted I became. One day I walked out onto the street and saw the bustling crowds, each face radiant, each laugh echoing. Amidst that sea of people, I felt completely invisible. I was there, but I seemed not to exist. No one noticed, no one cared. And it was in that moment that I suddenly understood, the most cruel thing is not to be hated, but to be forgotten. There were some rainy afternoons when I sat alone in a dark room, listening to the raindrops falling outside the window. It felt as if the whole world was crying for me. But when the rain stopped, the sun came out, while I remained in the dark. I didn't know what to do to escape. I just sat there letting time pass, letting my heart gradually turn to stone. Loss, brokenness. Those words sound cliché until you truly experience them. I went through it not once, but many times, as if fate wanted to crush me to the very end. And indeed, there were times I believed I had completely fallen, that I had nothing left to lose. However, in that very moment, I realized a bitter truth. A person only truly hits rock bottom when they see themselves become a shadow, a form that exists but has no life. I was there. I knew what it was like to become my own shadow. And from within that darkness, I only had one of two choices: give up everything or find a reason to get back up. But at that time, I had no reason. I only had a colossal emptiness. There were nights I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart beating slowly as if counting down every second until the moment I would give up. I had thought of death many times as a release. It was strange. It was both a fear and a wish. In the darkness, that thought crept in like a venomous snake, coiling around my heart, tightening my breath, and making me believe that only by ending everything could I find peace. I remember the evenings I sat alone, a razor blade on the table, a box of sleeping pills, a rope draped behind the door. They were there, silent, like exits that I never had the courage to enter. I wanted to end it, but at the same time, a vague fear held me back. A fear not just of pain, but of the emptiness on the other side of the abyss. After death, what would be waiting for me? Or would it just be an endless, cold, and darker void than the present? I was stuck. I wanted to escape, but I didn't dare to take the step. I wanted to give up, but I was afraid. Each time I failed in my attempt to end my life, I didn't feel relief, but sank even deeper into a sense of helplessness. I blamed myself. You can't even die, so what are you living for? During those days, darkness not only covered the outside of the room, but also seeped into my soul. I gradually lost all feeling. No more joy, no more motivation, no more dreams. Every morning I woke up, I asked myself, what am I living for? Does anyone need me? The world around me was still bustling. People were still laughing and loving, but to me it was all a play where I was just a lost audience. There were times I went to the riverbank, looking at the water flowing under the bridge, and whispered to myself, just one more step and it will all end. But then I didn't dare. Once I stood in front of the train tracks, listening to the screech of the steel rushing toward me. One step, just one more step, and everything would disappear. But my feet were frozen, unmoving. I was afraid, I trembled, and then I turned my back and left, leaving behind a roar that seemed to cut through my soul. I felt like a failure at both living and dying. No one understood, and no one knew how torn I was. I smiled when I met others, but my heart was empty. I pretended to be okay, but at night my tears flowed. I yearned for a hand to hold, a voice to pull me out of the abyss, but around me was only silence. Truly, I wasn't as afraid of dying as I was of living without meaning. The emptiness was the greatest obsession. Death at least seemed like an end, but my life at that time was nothing but a prolonged death. I dragged myself through each day like a shadow. In my despair, I started to resent myself, my family, and my life. I asked, if there truly is a God, why did he let me live like this? Why didn't he just take me away? But there was no answer, only silence. A silence so terrifying that I thought I was invisible in this universe. One night, I sat alone in my dark room, the faint yellow light casting distorted shadows on the wall. In front of me was a sharp blade, my hand trembling as I held it tight. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, this time will be different. I will escape from everything. But at that very moment, a cold shiver ran down my spine, and a small voice echoed in my mind. Don't. It's not time yet. I didn't know where it came from. Was it my imagination? Was it weakness? Or was it something beyond my control? I dropped the blade. It fell onto the table with a dry clink, but the sound reverberated in my heart like an alarm bell. I burst into tears. I collapsed onto the table, sobbing like a lost child. I didn't die, but I also didn't know what to live for. Between the two shores, I was suspended, belonging nowhere. In those days, I reached the depths of despair. I thought the darkness had consumed everything. But it was in that depth, in the deepest part of the emptiness, that something began to form. I didn't realize it yet, but an invisible hand was still holding me, preventing me from falling to the bottom. A hand I had not yet named. That night, the darkness not only covered the small room where I sat, but also seemed to swallow my soul. I remember the heavy feeling like a stone on my chest, making it hard to breathe, each breath becoming rushed and desperate. Outside the window, the city was still lit, still bustling with the sounds of life. But inside me, there was only emptiness and a whisper. End it. There's nothing left to live for. I had tried to drive that thought away many times, but the more I resisted, the more it echoed, like a dark melody repeating in my head. I felt like I was sinking in a bottomless pit where all hope had been buried. The people around me could see me smile and talk, but they didn't know that inside me was a fierce storm with no end. In that moment of weakness, I started to cry. The muffled sobs echoed in the silent room, mixing with the chaotic rhythm of my heart. I didn't know why I was crying, Maybe it was because of the pain, maybe because of helplessness, or maybe because for the first time, I dared to admit to myself that I couldn't bear it all. I had lived for so long in hiding, so used to wearing a mask of strength. But that night, in the dark, the mask fell, leaving a raw, weak, and exhausted person. Then, as if a natural reflex, a whisper came from my trembling lips. "Please, someone, if anyone is out there, please save me." I didn't know who I was calling out to. I had never really believed in religion, nor had I ever thought of praying. But in that moment, in the ultimate despair, I felt I needed a hand, something bigger than myself to pull me out of the deep hole. The plea was not clear, had no form, just vague, trembling cries through my tears. After those whispers, I waited. There was no thunder, no light flashed in the darkness, and no voice of an angel echoed. The room remained silent, but inside me something strange began to stir. I couldn't name it. It was fragile, as gentle as a passing breeze, but it was enough to make me pause for a moment instead of giving up. I listened. In the silence, I suddenly felt something gentle, like an invisible embrace wrapping around me. It wasn't exactly joy, and it was certainly not happiness. It was more like a little warmth placed in my long, cold heart. That little warmth was so small compared to the abyss inside me, but it made me realize maybe I wasn't completely abandoned yet. We sat in a small coffee shop by chance because we were both avoiding a sudden rain shower. The person started a conversation, asking a few random things. I answered perfunctorily, but for some reason, the conversation became longer than I expected. They listened to me more than they talked, and when they spoke, their voice was very gentle, as if every word was placed in the right place so as not to hurt anyone. Then they started telling me about their own life. They had also gone through pains and brokenness that, when I heard about them, felt strangely familiar. But unlike me, they didn't choose to give up. The person said that in their most desperate moment, they found God, a being they called the source of life, love, and liberation. I was silent. I had never cared much about religion before. To me, God was just a distant concept that people mention in church, with nothing to do with this chaotic reality. However, when I heard them talk about how God had touched their life, how He had pulled them out of the darkness, I couldn't deny the sincerity in their eyes and voice. You know, when they said, "Sometimes we think there's no way out, but God opens a path right where it seems like a dead end. You don't have to change immediately, just open your heart a little. He will do the rest." Those words were like a drop of water falling on the arid desert of my heart. It didn't transform me instantly, but it planted something in me, a tiny, fragile ray of light, but enough for me to realize that the darkness around me wasn't everything. I still didn't dare to believe, but I also couldn't completely dismiss it. When I left the coffee shop that day, I looked up at the sky after the rain. The clouds were still gray, but a few sunbeams had broken through. I suddenly thought of what I had just heard. Could it be that there really is a God who can save me? Could it be that I don't have to live in this despair forever? From that day on, I started thinking more. At night, when I once again faced the familiar darkness, I not only heard the whispers telling me to end it, but also the echoing words of that person. God can open a path. That sentence didn't leave me alone. It was like a tiny seed that had just been planted, not yet visible on the barren ground, but silently living, silently sprouting. I don't know where I'm going, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I've found a faint crack of light at the end of the tunnel. Even though it's a very small ray of light, it's enough for me to stop, take a deep breath, and think, maybe my life isn't over yet. On some days, I felt like I had escaped the dark spiral, but with just a gentle breeze, a vague memory, everything pulled me back to the beginning. In my soul, a constant battle raged. On one side was the sweet but deadly call of addiction. On the other was the gentle whisper of life and hope. Addiction didn't come to me like a stranger. It was like an old friend, always there, lurking and waiting. Whenever I was tired, weak, it would whisper, "Let me help you forget everything. Just one more time, and the pain will subside." I knew it was a lie, but why was it so tempting? With just a nod, I would be able to escape reality, even if only for a moment. But then, on the other side, there was another voice. This voice was not loud, not tempting, but it brought a deep sense of peace. It was a call. Choose life. You were not created to die in this darkness. Get up. Every time I heard it, my heart was moved, like a lost child hearing its mother's call. I knew that if I followed it, I would be saved. But why was it so difficult? The battle did not take place in one moment, but continued day after day. I woke up in the morning with a strong determination. Today I will not fall. But with just a phone call from an old friend, a familiar scent, or a lonely afternoon, that determination would waver. I hated myself for that weakness. Sometimes I screamed in my heart, why can't I break free? Why am I tempted like this forever? Am I really useless? On those nights I curled up, trembling in the dark, like a defeated person. Yet in that despair I began to feel something strange. Every time I fell, there was a power that didn't let me fall completely. It was as if an invisible hand always lifted me, whispering, "You are not finished yet. I am still here." I couldn't explain it with my mind, but my heart knew for sure. It was God. I began to realize that this battle was not just against addiction, but also a battle with my self-doubt, shame, and deep-seated fear. I had become so used to running away that I forgot I could face it. I needed a power greater than myself, and that power didn't come from drugs, from friends, or from any therapy, but from the one who called me back. Once in a fierce moment of temptation, I knelt down and cried, "God, I can't win on my own. If you are really there, please save me. Please fight for me." Right then, I felt a wave of peace envelop me. The temptation didn't disappear completely, but I no longer felt alone. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't fighting alone. From that day on, I started to learn how to face the battle with a different attitude. Every time temptation came, I would close my eyes and pray. I didn't always win, but I gradually learned how to get up after each fall. I learned that failure is not the end, but a reminder that I need to hold on to God even tighter. The battle in my soul continues every day, but now I know. On one side is the call of destruction, and on the other is eternal life. I have the right to choose. And although the road is difficult, I am determined to choose life, choose the light, choose Him. Because I believe that if He did not abandon me in my darkest days, He will never abandon me on this journey of revival. That night, my room seemed more suffocating than ever. There was no sound but the ticking of the clock, but inside my heart was a storm. I sat on my bed, my hands clutching my head, my eyes blurred with tears I couldn't wipe away. I once thought I was strong, had tried to fight with my mind, and had told myself that I would overcome this pain as I had overcome so many other events. But this time was different. All my efforts, all my strength seemed to vanish. I was exhausted. At that moment, a strange thought echoed in my head. Kneel down. I didn't know where the voice came from my subconscious or from somewhere higher. But instinctively, I felt my legs tremble, and slowly I knelt on the cold floor. I had never prayed before, never thought I would actually turn to God. I always thought God was only for those who were too religious or for those who had nothing left to hold on to. But now I was the one with nothing to hold on to. In that darkness, I uttered clumsy words. "Lord, if you truly exist, please hear me. I can't take it anymore. I'm exhausted. I'm afraid of myself, afraid of the thoughts in my head that keep urging me to end my life. I don't want to die, but I also don't know how to live anymore. Please, please save me." Each word came out like a burst from my chest, like the stones that had been piled up for so long being rolled away from my heart. And then I cried. I cried uncontrollably, like a child who had lost its mother in a crowded market. The tears fell to the floor, mixing with my muffled sobs, making me tremble. I don't know how long I cried. I only know that the more I cried, the lighter my heart felt. For the first time in my life, I felt so small. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't strong, couldn't bear everything on my own. In that moment, I let go of my arrogant self, the mask I had been wearing, to reveal a raw and wounded person. I told God everything without hiding. I talked about my fears, my painful memories, my shattered dreams. I confessed that I had wanted to die, that I had thought I had no value. And then something strange happened. Amidst the sobbing, I felt a quiet peace envelop me. There was no light flashing, no miraculous voice from heaven, but a stillness that seeped deep into my soul. The coldness in my heart gradually vanished, giving way to an indescribable warmth. I felt as if someone was hugging me, gently, patiently, and full of love. Through my tears, I whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for not abandoning me." I knelt for a long time that night. With every passing second, I felt a little more healed. I no longer felt abandoned, no longer felt lonely in the world. Although I didn't fully understand God yet, although I didn't know how to move forward, I knew one thing for sure. There was a God who was listening to me. There was an invisible hand that lifted me up when I thought I was about to fall. When I stood up, my legs were still shaking, but my heart was different. It was no longer as heavy as before. I looked up at the ceiling, blurred in the dark, but in my mind I saw a wide open sky. I had experienced the first moment of truly praying, of truly speaking words from the depths of my heart. And I knew, from that moment on, my life would never be the same again. The first days of my recovery journey were like fighting a fierce storm in my mind and body. My body trembled, cold sweat broke out in waves. My mind spun, and my heart beat so fast it felt like it would explode. Every cell in my body screamed, demanding the toxic substance I had depended on for so long. Never had I felt so small and helpless. Some nights I lay curled up, my body writhing in pain. My breath was short and heavy. My mind felt like it was being torn into pieces. The addiction whispered in my ear, "Just one more time, and you'll feel better." But deep down, another voice echoed, gentle yet firm, "You are not alone. I am here." I started to pray, not with flowery words or polished sentences, but with cries from the bottom of my heart. "God, I'm so weak. I can't get through this. Please help me." And it was strange in those moments when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore. I felt a source of strength pour into me. It wasn't from my body, not from the fragile will that had failed so many times, but a supernatural, gentle yet certain strength, like invisible hands holding me up. On the third day, my body was exhausted, and the trembling made me unable to hold a glass of water. I sat in a daze, my eyes blurred with despair. But then, a strange belief arose in my heart. "I will give you new strength." I didn't hear it with my ears, but my heart heard it very clearly. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I felt I could get up. Not with my own strength, but with His. As the days passed, I began to notice something strange. The addiction still tormented me, but it no longer reigned supreme. Every time a temptation came, I would kneel and pray, and each time I was lifted up as if a gentle breeze blew away the dark cloud. It wasn't a strength that came from me, because if I had relied on myself, I would have fallen long ago. It was the strength from Him. One evening, as I was trembling in my room, I suddenly saw a faint light coming through the window. The light was very ordinary, but in that moment, it became incredibly sacred. I closed my eyes, and in my mind, an image of a hand reaching out to me appeared. I cried like a child, feeling that He was truly present, not abandoning me. Those tears were not of pain, but of hope. The first days of recovery were a fierce battle, but I was no longer fighting alone. Every drop of sweat was a testament that His grace was enough for me. Every tremor was an opportunity for me to experience the supernatural strength from the one I had once rejected. I realized that to break free from the chains, I needed not only determination, but also a strength that transcended myself. And I found that strength in God. He not only healed my body, but also restored my soul, teaching me, "When you are weak, my strength is made perfect." Looking back, I know that without Him, I would have fallen in the very first days. But thanks to the strength from Him, I stood firm, stepping out of the hell of addiction and into a new journey, a journey of living in true freedom. I once thought my life was forever bound in chains. Every day I was like a slave to my cravings, only to be tormented by the emptiness afterward. How many times did I promise myself I would stop? But that promise only lasted a few hours or a few days, and then I was back where I started. I hated myself, hated the weakness and helplessness that I couldn't overcome. I felt like a bird trapped in a dark cage, its wings broken, never able to fly out. But God did not abandon me. He waited patiently. He still whispered in my heart, "You belong to me. You were not born to be a slave to sin." These words echoed not once but many times in the moments when I was most desperate. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was just an illusion of an exhausted mind. But gradually, I realized it was His call, gentle yet powerful, firm yet full of love. The journey to break free from the chains was not a miracle that happened in an instant. It was an arduous process. There were days when I trembled, sweat poured down, and my body writhed in agony from the lack of things that had once controlled me. I cried, I screamed, and sometimes I just wanted to end it all. But in those moments, I started to learn how to pray. For the first time in years, I knelt and uttered a very simple prayer. "Lord, please save me. I can't get out on my own. If you don't hold my hand, I will fall." And then I saw the difference. The craving still came, but it was no longer as intense as before. The fear still surrounded me, but it no longer suffocated me. I felt a certain power lifting me up every time I thought I was about to collapse. I realized that it wasn't me who was getting stronger, but that He was fighting on my behalf. Once, after many days of struggling, I went for a walk outside. The sky was clear that day, and the sunlight shone through the leaves. I stopped, took a deep breath, and unexpectedly burst into tears. How long had it been since I last felt the taste of fresh air, unpolluted by the dust of sin? How long had it been since I had looked at the sky and realized that I was still alive? In that very moment, I knew the door to freedom had begun to open. I started to change my habits. Instead of seeking artificial pleasures, I spent time reading the Bible, listening to praise music, and writing down my prayers. At first, it felt awkward, but gradually I felt my heart being filled. I no longer needed those things to fill the void, because now God's love had filled my heart. Once, when I was talking to a friend who also struggled with addiction, I casually said, "We don't have to live like prisoners anymore. God has opened the door. The question is whether we dare to step out." As soon as I said that, I felt a sense of awakening. I understood that I had truly stepped out myself. The chains had fallen, the dark cage had opened, and I was no longer a slave to the past. The freedom I found was not just escaping from the addictive substance. It was also the freedom of the soul, no longer being held captive by sin, no longer living in guilt and fear. I learned to forgive myself and to love myself as God has loved me. I am not saying the path was easy. Sometimes the darkness still tried to pull me back. But now I know I have a place to lean on. I know I am not fighting alone. I know that true freedom is not created by human will, but comes from God's grace. Today, when I look back, I see one thing clearly. Without God, I could never have escaped. I would still be crawling in the darkness, or perhaps I wouldn't even be alive today. But because of Him, I was able to stand up. Because of Him, I'm able to live as a true person, free, at peace, and full of hope. The door to freedom has opened, and I am certain of one thing. I will never return to that dark place again. I have been set free, and now I want to use my life to testify that God can break every chain, no matter how heavy. Family, a word that sounds so warm, but during my darkest time, it became a deep wound in my heart. I had caused my parents to lose sleep from worry. I had made my siblings feel embarrassed to mention me, like an unnamed pain. In their eyes, I was once a burden, someone who had brought so much disappointment to the family so many times. And in my despair, I even wanted to run away from the very people who loved me the most. I remember once, my mother was sitting on the porch, her eyes empty as she stared into the distance. I walked out, but she didn't even notice me. The sorrow was so etched on her face that I felt as if my mother had aged 10 years in a short time. I stood in silence, not daring to get close, because I was the reason she was like that. At that moment, I wished I could just disappear so my family would stop suffering. However, when I met God, everything started to change. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a journey. a journey where he held my hand every step of the way. He not only healed my heart, but also touched the relationships that seemed so broken they could never be mended. I clearly remember the first night I bravely sat down with my parents. The dinner table, which was used to a heavy silence, was illuminated that day by a sincere apology. I cried so much that I couldn't even speak a full sentence. I just stammered, "I'm sorry for everything I've done. I know I've caused you so much pain, but I've met God and He is making me new. I don't dare to ask for forgiveness right away. I just ask for a chance to love my family again." My mother burst into tears. My father was silent, but his eyes were red. That silence was no longer disappointment, but a sign of a heart that was melting. In that very moment, I felt a gentle breeze of reconciliation blowing into the house, as if God Himself was present there. In the days that followed, I started to be more proactive. I no longer avoided my siblings. I called to check in, and I apologized to each of them. Some were silent, some responded with anger. "Don't bother me again. I don't believe you." But I didn't give up. I prayed for each of them. I believed that God had forgiven me, and He could also put forgiveness in the hearts of my family. Then a miracle happened. One morning I received a text message from my brother, the one I had hurt the most. "Maybe you have really changed. I want to see you. I want to hear you talk about the God you believe in." My heart felt like it was going to explode with joy. That day we sat in a small cafe. He looked at me, his eyes still skeptical, but with a little hope. I told him about my journey, from the depths of despair to the light of God. I didn't try to convince him. I just told him what I had lived and gone through. And in the end I said, "You don't have to believe right away. Just see that the brother you knew before is dead, and the person sitting in front of you today is a new person." He was silent for a long time, then nodded softly. Just a nod, but for me it was a sign that forgiveness was beginning. My family gradually changed. The meals were no longer heavy. Laughter echoed more often. My parents started praying with me. My siblings gradually opened up, no longer criticizing but listening. I realized that reconciliation did not just come from my efforts, but was the miraculous work of the Holy Spirit. He melted hearts that seemed to be frozen. One day my mother hugged me and whispered, "My son, I once thought I would lose you forever, but now I know God has given you back to me. Not just my son, but a new person." I cried like a child. Those tears were no longer of regret, but of gratitude. I knew my family had been mended, not by human effort, but by the amazing grace of God. And I also understood that family is not just a place to give and receive, but also the place where God's grace is most clearly revealed. When He heals a heart, He also wants to heal the relationships around that heart. I was once the cause of my family's brokenness, but now I get to witness my family reuniting, loving, and forgiving. That was beyond any dream I ever had, and I can only praise God, the one who turned the impossible into the possible. For a long time I lived without knowing what I was living for. Each day was a faint copy of the day before. I woke up, did what needed to be done, and then sank into meaningless worries. My heart was empty. I even once thought, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone really care? I had sought purpose in my work, in my relationships, in success, and in the recognition of others, but it all faded quickly. Joy would come and then disappear, like sand slipping through my fingers. The more I tried to hold on, the more desperate I became. I thought this life was just a series of meaningless struggles, and then it would all end in nothingness. However, the day I met God, everything began to change. When His light touched the darkest corner of my soul, I realized that I was not born to live a meaningless life. I was created out of love and called to live in that love. For the first time in years, my heart lit up with a new belief. I have a reason to live for God and to serve others. A quiet turning point. I didn't understand it all at once. At first, it was just very small steps. One morning, I woke up and felt grateful that I was still breathing. Another evening, I felt the urge to pray for a friend who was suffering. Gradually, I realized that the greatest joy is not in what I keep for myself, but in what I give away. I remember once walking through an alley and seeing an elderly man selling lottery tickets, huddled in the cold night. Normally, I would have walked past, but that day, a voice echoed in my heart, "Stop!" I hesitated, then walked over, bought a few lottery tickets from him, and sat down to talk. It wasn't about the money, but because I wanted him to know that he wasn't invisible. And something strange happened. When I saw his smile, I realized my heart felt strangely warm. I began to understand that my purpose in life was no longer about satisfying myself, but about becoming a channel for God's love to others. Living for God, no longer a theory. Someone asked me, what does it mean to live for God? If I had been asked before, I would have been confused. But now I know the answer is not in doctrines, but in the small actions of every day. Living for God is learning to put Him at the center of every decision. From how I choose to behave with a family member, to how I use my time, money, and even my dreams. Living for God also means daring to give up the things that once held me captive. Pride, the habit of comparing myself to others, the obsession with proving my self-worth. Instead, I began to learn to believe that my worth is not in what I can do, but in the fact that I am His child. And from that foundation, a new freedom opened up. I no longer live to please others, nor do I live in aimless emptiness. I live to please the one who gave me life. Serving, the path to true happiness. In the past, I thought serving others was a burden, but as I walked with God, I realized that serving is not about losing myself, but about finding myself. When I hold the hand of a friend who is falling, I feel God giving strength through me. When I take the time to listen to someone who is in despair, I realize that I am also being healed. When I teach a child to pray, their clear eyes remind me of the simple faith that I once lost. Serving is not something I have to do to prove something. It is a privilege I get to do because God first loved me. It is in every small act that I find a lasting joy, a joy that the years of chasing success or fame never brought me. I was given a mission. Gradually, I realized that God did not just save me from despair, but also to make me a witness to His love and grace. I no longer live just to exist. I was given a mission to share what I have been through so that those who are in the dark know that they can also find the light. Maybe I can't change the whole world, but I believe that every time I share my story, someone will realize they are not alone. Every time I pray for others, a seed of hope is planted. And every time I am faithful in small things, God can use that to do something greater than I can imagine. The end, the beginning. Looking back, I see that the path I have taken was not meaningless. Even the darkest days became the background for God's light to shine brighter. Now I no longer ask, why should I live? I know I live to love God, to serve, and to be a part of His good plan. Every day I wake up, I don't just breathe. I breathe with a purpose. I walk not to find meaning, but to live fully in that meaning. And that is the first time in years that I have had a reason to live, a reason that will never fade, to live for God and to serve others. There was a time when I was a slave, not a slave chained by iron, but by the invisible chains of addiction, despair, and darkness. I lived in that captivity for many years, with no real freedom. I was led by sinful habits and controlled by uncontrollable desires. I thought I was strong, but in reality, I was so weak that with just one craving, all my willpower would vanish. However, the day God came, everything began to change. I'm not saying everything disappeared instantly. Addiction is not like a wound that just needs a bandage to heal. But since I met Him, I was no longer alone in that battle. I had a new strength, a new love, a hope I had never held before. And because of that, I started walking in freedom little by little. Once I returned to my old neighborhood and met some of the friends I had walked with in the darkness. They looked at me with suspicious eyes. Did you really change? Or are you just pretending to be better for a while, and then you'll go back to how you were? I smiled. I knew they didn't believe me right away. In the past, I didn't even believe I could escape. But now I don't need to prove it with words, but with my very life. I told them about the moment I met God, about the moment He pulled me out of the abyss and gave me another chance to live. Some people laughed mockingly, but some eyes welled up with tears. I realized that they also longed to be saved, just as I had longed to be. From then on, I started to witness. At first, it was just small stories with a few acquaintances. Later, I shared at small groups and then went to young people who were held captive by addiction. I didn't use flowery words or complicated theories. I just talked about myself, about the weakness and darkness I had tasted, and about how God had brought me into the light. The miraculous thing was that every time I testified, not only were the listeners touched, but I was also reminded of the grace I had received. I saw how small I was, but His grace was immeasurably great. From a slave to sin, I was now a witness to freedom. Once a young man came to me after hearing my testimony. He trembled as he spoke. "Sir, I'm also an addict. I've tried to quit many times but couldn't. Do you think God can save me?" I looked at him and saw an image of my younger self, desperate, tired, and just hoping for a hand to pull me out of the mud. I put my hand on his shoulder and replied, "God didn't just save me, He is also ready to save you. He loves you just as much as He loves me." We prayed together. His tears fell, as if the invisible chains were slowly being removed. In that moment, I knew I was no longer living just for myself. The transformation in me was not meant to be kept but to be shared, so that many others could also be touched by the love and freedom from the one who saved me. I understand that the road ahead still has challenges, but now I no longer define myself by my sinful past. I am a child of God. I am a person who has been forgiven, and I am a witness, living to tell the world that if He can save someone like me, He can save anyone. When I started to step out of my own darkness, I realized that this journey was not just for me. God saved me, not just so I could live, but so I could become a part of His greater plan, to bring light to those who are still lost. The first time I attended a small group in the church, I felt both anxious and excited. There were people there who had gone through the same pain as me: addiction, brokenness, being abandoned by family, and being looked down upon by society. But instead of looks of contempt, I saw a welcome, hugs, and sincere prayers. I felt a new family, a community where the past was no longer a chain, but a testament to God's power. In that small group, everyone had their own story. Some were addicted to alcohol, some fell into drugs, and some lost everything to gambling. But when they talked about how God had transformed their lives, I saw hope reflected in their eyes. For the first time, I believed that I was truly not alone. I belonged to a community of saved people. I gradually got more involved, reading the Bible with them, praying for each other, and then starting to share my own story. At first, I was trembling, afraid that people would judge me. But instead of judging, they listened with empathy. And when I spoke about the moment God saved me from the intention of ending my life, many people burst into tears, not out of pity, but because they had also stood on the same edge. My testimony became a source of strength for them. Not long after, I started to participate in outreach to addicts. I went with my small group to rehabilitation centers in struggling areas, where people were chained by cigarettes, drugs, alcohol. I saw an image of my past in their empty eyes and trembling hands. And I knew they needed not just advice, but a real ray of hope. I told them about my journey, from someone who seemed to have lost everything, to being set free by God and given a new life. Many didn't believe me right away, but some looked at me with a changed expression, as if they had just seen a door open. I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, but I have something precious, a living testimony that God can do what seems impossible. In the process of serving, I learned a big lesson. Healing is never a lonely journey. A person can start to change, but it is the loving community that helps them stand firm. I know that without my small group, without the people walking with me, I probably would have fallen back. And now I am called to do that for others, to give away what I have received. Once after I shared my testimony at a rehabilitation center, a man came up to me. He looked at me for a long time and then choked up and said, "You have shown me that there is still hope for me. If God can save you, He can surely save me too." Those words were like an arrow straight to my heart. I realized that even if just one person is touched, my journey is not in vain. I began to understand a verse in the Bible more deeply. "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." Matthew 5:14. I was once lost in darkness, but now I am called to be the light. Not my own light, but the light of the one who saved me, reflected through my life. Every time I look back, I see a clear difference. From an addict, a slave to sin, I am now transformed into someone who brings hope to the community. I no longer live just for myself, but for the mission God has given me. And as I walk this path, I understand that the light will never go out as long as I continue to shine where He leads. I once thought that freedom was being able to do whatever I wanted, with no one controlling me, no one binding me. I threw myself into parties, alcohol, drugs, and the addictions that held me captive for years. But it was all just another prison, wrapped in sweet illusions. I thought I was living, but in reality, I was just existing, hiding in invisible chains. The day I knelt and cried out to God, everything started to change. It wasn't an instant miracle that turned me into a perfect person, but a long journey, step by step, day by day. I clearly remember the restless nights when the craving for the substance came back, when the memories of the old pleasures seemed to want to swallow me whole. But then, in those moments of weakness, I heard a gentle whisper, "You are no longer a slave. You are free in me." True freedom did not come from my willpower, but from His Holy Spirit. He did not just remove the chains, He also gave me a new heart. I began to love the things I once hated: silence, morning prayers, God's word echoing in my small room. I felt peace in my heart, a kind of peace that no substance or pleasure could ever give. I remember the first day I dared to testify in front of the church about how God had saved me. My voice trembled, tears fell, but in my heart there was a strange sense of relief. I no longer had to hide, no longer had to wear a mask. I stood before everyone, and first and foremost before myself, and openly admitted, I was once in chains, but now I am free. And as I said those words, I realized that the final chain in my mind had also fallen. Freedom is not just escaping addiction, it is also living in the purpose God has for you. I found joy in serving, in listening to those who were suffering just as I was before. I was not just saved to live for myself, but to become a living testimony of His love and grace. Someone asked me, "Aren't you afraid you'll fall back?" I smiled and replied, "I am no longer afraid, because I know the one who saved me is stronger than any chain." I am not arrogant about my own strength, but I believe in the one who promised that He would hold my hand to the very end. Looking back on my journey from the darkest days to today, I can only say, it is by grace. Without God, I would not be here to write, to tell my story, to breathe, and to live in this freedom. I was a person who deserved to die, but He gave me life. I was a slave, but He gave me freedom. I was a lost person, but He found me and brought me home. Now, whenever I hear a hymn, my heart overflows with gratitude. I no longer have to try to prove myself, no longer have to run from the past. I am loved, an unconditional love, not because I am worthy, but because He is love. And in that love, I find true freedom. This journey is ending, but at the same time, it is opening up a new beginning. I know I will continue to walk, continue to stumble and learn, but never alone again. God is with me, and with Him I have true freedom, freedom to love, freedom to forgive, freedom to live a life that no longer belongs to the darkness, but to His eternal glory. If you are reading these words and feel that you are also held captive by something, it could be addiction, your past, pain, or emptiness, please know this: you do not have to fight alone. Jesus is still reaching out His hand, ready to break every chain and give you true freedom. Come to Him as I once did. Try to give Him your broken heart, and you will see how He can transform your life.